Have you ever witnessed a bride or groom say "I do not" at a wedding? If so, what happened next? While working in the wedding industry for over 17 years, we have hosted on average 140 weddings per year. 10 plus years ago, we had a wedding, and the groom and his groomsmen arrived, taking pictures, joking around. Guests all arrived, took their seats, and about 5 minutes before the wedding was supposed to start, the bride's limo pulled up to the chapel. The bride's father got out, walked inside the chapel, walked to the microphone and stated the wedding was called off. His daughter would not be getting married today. He directed Missile and my staff to still feed and liquor up all the guests since he had already paid for all 170 people, and got back into the limo and left. I never heard the story, but that was by far the most awkward event I have ever managed. It was a joke, but he was too nervous and it didn't really work. Everyone that heard him called him a jackass that ruined his own wedding. I was humiliated for him. Yeah, I think it's a dickhead thing to do. Jokes are meant to be funny. I wish I did. Someone I know was dating this guy for 5 months. On the 5th month, he took her to a big production play. During the play, he got the entire cast of the play to help him with the proposal. And when the lights came on for the proposal, nearly her entire extended family was there, as well as his entire extended family, and friends as well, as he had paid for all their tickets. Most of the people she knew was in that room, watching this take place, and almost none of them knew this was going to happen, just that they had free tickets to a popular Broadway musical. So friends, family, cast and crew had all come out, watching as her 5th-month boyfriend proposed to her. She said yes because of the pressure, and married him. She is incredibly depressed. Should have just backed out later. It's amazing how many people end up unhappy because they aren't willing to put themselves first. I was in attendance where the pastor says repeat after me, for better or worse, and the groom said for better or for better. Everyone chuckled, but there was a hint of honesty there. They divorced after 9 months. I had a friend who decided to have a whole stage scene at this moment, with a mini soap opera playing out in the middle of the wedding. A mutual female friend who was pregnant stood up and said that the baby was the groom's, and her husband flipped out. All the wedding party had scripted lines like "Shut up Susan, you know you lost your chance with him after the disappearance of your mysterious twin sister." The bride and groom were all in on it. It took the rest of the people only a few lines to realize the thing was a joke. Fun was had by all, until about 3 years edit. Actually, I am told more like 3 months later, when the soap opera actually happened and she cheated on him with his friend. Yes, at my cousin's wedding, the bride suddenly backed out at the last seconds. The wedding was abruptly cancelled and we, the family of the groom, all went to a restaurant instead. The bride was kind of a bee who was abusive towards my cousin and extorts him of his money, so we also relieved that this happened. Bullet dodged. One of the times my father went to the altar after my mom had divorced him. He was a serial groom. Any event, the wedding was being hosted at someone's house and they got in front of the minister and decided not to get married. But they were both drunks and there was a lot of booze stocked up, and why let all that go to waste? So they decided to get crap show drunk and have a party. I don't remember her name as it would have been his 5th marriage at the time. He eventually hit marriage number 5, walked away from an engagement one more time and was engaged yet again when he died. Not exactly that, but an acquaintance of mine was getting married. A few days before the wedding they realized they weren't going to make as a couple. However, because everything was paid for, they agreed to go through with it. Apparently they fooled people quite well, as a friend who was invited told me they looked so in love, but I knew it was just an act. A few months later, they quietly went their separate way. I was at a wedding where the bride didn't turn up. Was horribly awkward whilst the groom just refused to agree that she wasn't coming. We all sat there for over an hour waiting. Yeah, the pastor got the bride's name wrong. The groom was like, "I do not." All was well though. Everyone got a pretty good laugh out of it. Highlight of the entire ceremony. The pastor got the bride's name wrong. That's a pretty big screw up. You have one job. I know a wedding manager and he only witnessed it once, but the groom meant it as a joke. He had some sort of bet. The bride got mad and ran out of the church. I just picture this annoying 90s groom. I do. NOOT, then grinning and looking around for approval. I was at a wedding officiated by an ancient Catholic priest. He muddled his way through the ceremony but seemed to fall into the regular Sunday mass rhythm, forgetting this was a wedding. Eventually, he started to say the Our Father, one of the last parts of the ceremony. The congregation, following along on our ceremony booklets, realize something is wrong and start to rustle uncomfortably. Eventually, the best man went up to the priest and whispered in his ear. The priest was startled and uttered, "Oh, I forgot about that part." He then went on to ask the bride and groom if they actually wanted to get married. They both said, "I do." Next he forgot the "you may kiss the bride" line, so we all waited uncomfortably again until my friend shouted kiss. They kissed, we clapped, and they all lived happily ever after. TLDR. Old priest forgets to ask bride and groom if they want to get married. They do. Marriage is what brings us together today. I know it's not exactly a I do not, but when my parents got married and the priest said "you may now kiss the bride," my dad said, "Do I have to?" At my wedding, when the pastor was done talking, he was like, "UHH, count long dong. You can go ahead. Give her a kiss." It sounded freaking stupid and I felt robbed that I didn't get the usual "you may kiss your bride" line. Not exactly. The couple was so emotional they just couldn't answer. They are the sweetest of people who were burned badly in previous marriages that when things finally went right for them, they both broke down a little. Priest made a little joke about love, let them calm down, and started that part of the ceremony all over again. Obligatory, not exactly, but my aunt was with an abusive butthole and decided not to go through the day of and didn't show up. My grandfather went up and stood on the stage and said something along the lines of, "There won't be a wedding tonight, but stay for dinner and drinks on me." I like your grandfather. Yes, my own sister did this at her wedding. She was marrying this guy basically just for his money, and she apparently found out his business was failing and he was no longer a millionaire a few weeks before the ceremony. She wanted to embarrass him, so she did not call it off right away and dropped the bomb at the last second. Sounds like she is an awful human being. Not even close to the same, but at my wedding, I spaced out while the officiant was talking. When it got time for I do, I was just staring blankly out the window. My now wife got my attention, and I had to ask what was going on. I said, "I do. We didn't practice that part, sorry." I have been at a wedding where the bride basically said, "No, I don't submit to my husband." They had asked the officiant to not use any of that language when exchanging vows. He obviously didn't listen and she just crossed her arms and said, "No, I do not." When that part of the vows came about, they still got married and as far as I know live happily together. That whole wedding weekend was a circus from beginning to end. I know a guy here in Pittsburgh whose bride just didn't show up. He decided to go around and invite some local homeless folks to feed them with the catering he paid for. He's a fairly wealthy dude, so I'm sure the food was no firehole special, crappy thing, but a heck of a guy. Sounds like a swell dude. Probably one of the worst days of his life, but he managed to do something positive. Pretty close. My ex-father-in-law, a retired judge, was officiant at a friend's wedding. They wrote their own vows and didn't run them by him beforehand. I can't remember exactly how they went, but it was something like, "With me, you will never alone. Together, you need not fear sickness or loss. I won't ever leave your side." When they were done, he said, "I'm sorry, I can't accept those vows. Legally speaking, I need a clear and affirmative statement of consent from both of you, and you've phrased everything as a negative. Do you want to be married? Please answer in a clearly articulated statement of affirmative consent." They both said "I do," had a little laugh, and that was that. They were married. Not me, but an old high school friend who was cheating before her wedding was getting married and lightning hit the steeple right after they said their vows. Falling rock damaged some cars parked on the street next to the church. They lasted about a year. I kept a piece of the steeple for a long time and then tossed it a few years later when I realized it was probably bad luck. That's some spooky crap. Yes, but it was purely a mistake. But before the bride could process what she said, the man passed out and hit his head on a church pew, splitting it wide open. The wedding was stopped and his head was sewn up. After it was revealed that the bride indeed made a mistake. Needless to say, the groom was on pain meds and hitting the alcohol to help. It was all a big laugh afterwards. Same couple still married. 15-20 years now. When I was getting married, the officiant, clock at the courthouse, an older gentleman who had been in the business long enough to my parents, asked me if I would take wife's name to be my wife. After I said I do, he then turned to her and asked, do you take Hugh Chiswick to be your wife? To which she smiled, not skipping a beat, and said I take him to be my husband. Yes. There was a brief pause where the clerk looked at her funny and then he covered his face. I said wife, didn't I? There was a nice round of laughter for us and our immediate family friends, followed by his sincerest apologies. I'm constantly reminded I am the most handsome wife. This is not an I do not situation, but at my wedding my officiant, embarrassingly, confused me by asking questions like, will you care for your wife forever, will you hold her dear, will you support her, typical wedding questions. So I looked at my wife and said I will. I immediately realized my mistake and stammered out I do. I felt like an idiot. But hey, my wife gave me her right hand instead of her left for the wedding ring, so it all balanced out. I mean, if the question is will you X, then the answer should be I will. Answering with I do doesn't make any sense. I seriously felt like saying this, but didn't have the balls. Fights started in the honeymoon and marriage lasted 1.3 years. LPT. If you feel like saying that on your wedding day, do it. So much easier than navigating a divorce. No, but almost. I made a Princess Bride reference when we were sitting down with our officiant for the first time. We chuckled, and he never mentioned it again until the wedding day. He did the whole bit. Mortgage is what BWINGSUS to Java today, and so on. The whole speech. My family was cracking up, but she nor her family has never seen the movie. Honestly thought I was gonna go to bed drunk and single that night. When my oldest son got married last year, the minister did this. Loved it. My now husband started fidgeting during the sermonettes leading up to the exchanging of the views. The minister asked if we were ready to exchange vows. He said not yet. They didn't capture my reaction, nor did they get my daughters holding back my in full dress blues marine son. He leaned towards the minister and said he forgot the rings in the car. His son, who was taping the wedding, ran out and got them. My Phil yelled out, he didn't get that from me. Afterwards the minister and the wedding planner said that had never happened before. Neither one asked my husband beforehand because he seemed so calm. This is honestly hilarious. Not at the wedding, but at the rehearsal dinner the night before. Bride and groom's mother got into a fight out front of the restaurant. Groom said, I'm not marrying you until you apologize to my family and promise me you will fix this. Bride refused. Groom called off the marriage. Bride proceeded to still have the reception and slept with the groom's roommate. Come to find out later she was only marrying him for his parents' money. Safe to say the groom dodged a bullet. I love stories with a happy ending. Not me, but a fellow I know who photographed weddings. The groom, at the reception, after the wedding ceremony, giving his groom's speech to a packed reception hall, thanks the best man for sleeping with his wife the night before and walks out. I was in a wedding party that got super close to derailing. We coordinated a meetup before the ceremony for wedding pictures near some train tracks in an unfamiliar city. The groom did not do the best job of communicating to the bride the actual location, causing the bride's side to be late. This sent the bride into a fit of rage, saying such colorful phrases as "you always do this," "I hate you" to "I'm calling the freaking wedding off." This made for an incredibly awkward fist look, mind you. While the bride was screaming bloody murder, the groom was off in the distance with his head down and back turned to us. Within moments I got a text from him stating that he just adjusted his fantasy football lineup and was good to go. Pictures commenced and the wedding went off with a few more major hitches, including the bride crying and almost backing out moments before the walk. They expect their first child soon. I got a text from him stating that he just adjusted his fantasy football lineup and was good to go. I'm dying. No, but I seen someone object when the priest asked did anyone have a reason as to why the marriage shouldn't go forth. It was my drunk, troublemaking cousin, who professed her love for the groom, lol. She got thrown out. I hope you were related to the bride. I did see a couple signing marriage papers at the municipal building in my country, and then he decided after she signed that he wasn't really interested in being married. They talked it out. He got water dumped on him. We all got a show. Not at the ceremony, but after the rehearsal dinner the night before, the bride saw the groom dancing with all her bridesmaids at the bar. Seemed like normal fun drunk stuff, but she flipped out and made a giant scene. Ended up sitting in the backseat of my car. My wife was in the wedding, bawling and refusing to talk to groom. After like 30 minutes of people trying to talk sense into her, she told us to take her to her parents' house. Small town. We get there, take her inside, and leave. The next morning we find out the wedding is off. Apparently groom came over and she bitched him out. Said she didn't love him. Didn't want to go through with the wedding. Groom finally said okay fine. Then she turned it into he called off the wedding and became the victim. She ended up keeping the gigantic ring, going on the expensive honeymoon with a friend, while her parents had to eat the cost of the ceremony and reception because it was too late to cancel. Rumors were around $50K. That afternoon they brought around pieces of the wedding cake to everyone so it wouldn't go to waste. Our read on it was the bride never wanted to go through with it and this was her way out. I knew none of these people, so for me it was like watching a Jerry Springer episode. Me and another guy who knew no one just sat back and watched it all unfold going, this is awesome. My husband said, do I have to, when he was asked to say his vows. The judge said, do it or you aren't getting married today. He did it. Husband thinks he is funny. He is snot. Worst best I've seen in person was a bride saying I need a minute, leaving and then coming back a minute later to say I do. I was thoroughly confused, but it turns out she had been engaged shortly beforehand and he had died in a violent accident. I was at a destination wedding where bride called it off the night before. It was an awkward vacation for the two families for the rest of the week. One of the resort guests not related to the wedding wrote about it in their TripAdvisor review. I used to be a bartender, and once had a rehearsal dinner where the groom found out that his younger brother, also a groomsman, had lost his virginity to the bride-to-be. The details of when the act had happened never made it to me, and despite my best detective work I was never able to figure out whether or not the wedding actually went through. In my 16 years as a wedding photographer, I never had an I don't moment, but I did see many grooms and brides show up extremely late and very drunk. I had a lesbian couple break up on their honeymoon because one of them fooled around with the masseurs. I had two couples break up the day before the wedding for cheating, and one bride that stumbled down the aisle after taking 3 Xanax with champagne. There are so many more. Oh, the stories I can tell. Yeah, you need to go ahead and do an AMA. I heard much worse. Where I live it is not uncommon to have a civil wedding in restaurant. In the middle of party they stop everything and do the wedding. Then party continues. So before it started the groom handed bunch of closed envelopes to waiters and told them to distribute envelopes to every guest with requests not to open them before they are told. When all guests were there, groom took the microphone and told everyone that he won't marry the girl. He called her B, and if they want to know why, just open the envelope. Apparently there were photos of bride having sex with 2 guys. Groom just left. Needless to say that there was no wedding that day. Sounds like an urban legend I heard. So this isn't an I do not story, but everyone thought I was backing out story. On my wedding day things were going well. We had some laughs during the vows and enjoyed ourselves a lot. Then we went over to sign the papers with the maid of honor, best man as witnesses and the officiant. My wife went first, signed her name and all was well. I sat down and instead of doing my signature like I have for fricking years, I printed the first letter of my first name. I stopped and paused as I contemplated how to not further frick up this stupid situation. My wife was standing at my shoulder and saw that I had messed up, but the best man, maid of honor and officiant, they were standing off to the side and in front of us. They freaked out. Did I have cold feet? Was I backing out? Was I about to walk out of the hall and call the wedding off? Nope. I was just thinking about how to write cursive over my printing without looking like an even bigger turd. We all had a good laugh afterwards when I explained. Much fun was had. 10/10. Would marry wifey again. I apparently said no at a wedding once. A literal I do doesn't make sense in my language's grammar, so yes is the affirmative answer here. But I was like 3 years old and it was my aunt's wedding. though legend has it that it was perfectly timed as the groom was about to say yes. Years later, the kid of my cousin interrupted their parents' wedding during the objection question by screaming at the top of her lungs yes. Hilarious of course, but she was clearly so excited about their parents getting married, it was more of a just get to the do you take this man part already. My sister-in-law got left at the altar for her first wedding, but I didn't know her then. She's been married to her current husband for over 30 years now, so it all worked out. I was in the church waiting for the wedding of a friend's sister to start. Someone walked down the aisle and spoke to the bride's mother. She stood up and said, "That son of a b," and stormed out with other members of her family. Someone came out and announced that the wedding would not take place, but that the reception would go forward because of the expense. Food and drink was ready, etc. The DJ packed up and left, so it was pretty somber in there. Word came that the groom had just backed out last minute. Happened to one of my mom's friends. The groom thought it would be funny to say it then say he was kidding, but the priest had to take his first response and ended the ceremony right there. I don't think the relationship worked out. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Yes, I remember it. So this one guy I knew was an author and he was engaged to his editor. All the books we wrote were about this girl who he dated in high school. The girl moved to California after graduation and they broke up. A few years go by and the girl who the author man wrote about comes back to her home state and meets author man again. So a few more months go by leading up to the wedding and author man catches up with the girl who left for California and writes a book called The Comet. So his fiancée, the editor, reads the book he wrote the night before their wedding. It is about a little boy chasing after a comet. During the wedding, the bride notices the California girl getting out of her car. California girl drives a comet. So the fiancée tells the wedding party that she can't marry author boy because he's still in love with California girl. A few months later, author boy married California girl. That sounds like a movie. Here in my country, if you are in the military, your wife and your unmarried daughters receive a lifelong pension after you die, either of old age or in service. It does not matter. I had a neighbor ex-military in his 80s and never married. For the last 30 years he had a maid. She worked for him and took care of him when he got disabled and bound to a wheelchair due to old age. The maid also had an unmarried daughter to whom this man was a father figure. When the time came, they decided to get married so they could receive his pension after he died. In the ceremony, when the judge asked him the question, the guy threw himself to the floor and started having a seizure. Fake, of course. The judge decided he was not mentally fit to get married and left. Of course, the bridemaid left him for good. He died a couple of years later alone in a retirement home. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.